Hey, it's this guy, and here's this tutorial on how to change the oil on a Toyota 4Runner. It will apply to your 4Runner if it's a 2009 all the way to 2023, which is the current year. All those years use the same Toyota V6 engine. They've been using it since 2009, and chances are if you're watching this after 2023, they might still be using it. The key steps I'll cover is removing the skid plate, draining the engine oil, draining the oil from the filter housing, how to prep your new filter and the housing, refilling your oil, and resetting the oil meter in your dash. I'm using an STP Extra Life Filter 10158XL, 6.5 quarts of 0W20 oil. And I highly recommend checking your oil drain pan to make sure that it has over 7 quart capacity. This bad boy can take up to 16 quarts. When it comes to tools, you'll need a 10, 12, and 14 millimeter socket, a ratchet, and I recommend a 1/2 inch because it'll help with one of the filter steps. Some bolts are recessed, so you're going to need a socket extender unless you have deep sockets. And because Toyota uses a paper filter that goes in a housing, you'll need a 64 millimeter oil filter wrench, and I highly recommend that you get one that's heavy duty. Also note that these filter housings might require a 3/8 inch ratchet. I'd also recommend an oil funnel so you don't make a mess. Your 4Runner is already pretty high off the ground, but if you want to get beneath it, you'll need a floor jack and a jack stand. Oil changes can be messy, so a piece of cardboard goes a long way. And so do disposable gloves. And a flathead screwdriver for a couple of steps. With all that out of the way, we are now ready to get started. I always like to start by opening the hood. No real reason why, I actually don't even need to get in there till later on, but this is where I usually start. Now I'll need to fit camera gear beneath my 4Runner today, so I'm going to go ahead and lift it using my floor jack. This is a 3-ton floor jack, and you'll want to place it where you're lifting directly to the frame. Now you never want to rely solely on a jack, so you're going to place the jack stand underneath the frame as well, just in case. Now before we totally remove the skid plate, I want to call out that it is possible to do an oil change by removing the 4 rear bolts of the skid plate and letting it swing forward. But in this video, we're going to take it off. It's secured with 6 bolts and 1 push clip. We'll begin by taking out the first 2 bolts and the push clip, removing the first bolt on the driver's side, the third bolt that's on the passenger side, and using a flathead screwdriver to pry out the push clip that's in the middle. We'll now remove the 4th and 5th bolts. Transitioning to a 12 millimeter socket, we'll remove the bolt beneath the passenger side, followed by the bolt on the driver's side. The last 2 bolts are further back. Removing the rear bolt on the driver's side, and the final bolt on the passenger side. Pivot the skid plate down, and then you'll pull it forward to unhinge it. There's another skid plate further back, but you only need to remove the service hatch. The oil drain plug is beneath it. Position your oil drain pan beneath that plug. Use your 14 millimeter socket to remove the drain plug and let the oil drain out. With the oil draining, I always take the cap off. It makes me feel like it drains better, like it's not creating a suction or something. It should take about 5 to 7 minutes for the oil to totally drain out. Once it slows to a drip, go ahead and wipe down the opening and replace the drain plug. Secure the drain plug with the socket. Now when it comes to torque, most online recommendations are asking between 27 to 29 pounds. The cover can be replaced and be secured with the 12 millimeter bolts. Reposition the drain pan so that it's right beneath the oil filter housing. It's this round thing here underneath the first plate that you removed. The drain plug from the oil filter housing is designed to receive the tip of a 1/2 inch ratchet. Use it to loosen the plug. Once I remove it, I usually place it on the oil drain pan to not make a mess. It's hard to see, but there's a small O-ring underneath the filter housing that has to be removed, and you can do that with a flathead screwdriver. Your replacement oil filter should include a plastic nipple that's going to be used to drain out the drain filter housing. Just go ahead and press it into the opening at the bottom. It should drain in about 5 minutes. Once it comes to a drip, go ahead and pop that nipple off. Use your oil wrench to loosen the oil filter housing. You'll be turning counterclockwise. Eventually, it'll get loose enough that you can just loosen it by hand. To start preparing the filter housing, remove the old filter. I usually just set it on top of the oil drain pan. I do want to call out the placement of a very important O-ring. I can't stress enough how important it is that we get this step correct. Use a flathead screwdriver to pry off the old O-ring. It's not really hard to remove, this just makes it easier. Hang on to that O-ring for right now. It's not necessary, but I always wipe it down as I move through the steps. Your replacement filter came with 2 O-rings, and I love that they put this small hole in the bag here because it makes it easier for me to tear this open while I'm wearing gloves that are covered in oil. I'm going to start by replacing the larger O-ring, and we're going to slip it over the housing, and again, we need to place it in the exact spot that the old O-ring was in, right here. If you don't place the O-ring right here, you're going to leak oil everywhere and cause a lot of problems. Now that we've verified placement, take some used motor oil, and you're going to wipe it all over that O-ring. You basically want to lube it all up, because if not, it's going to bust when you're putting it back on, or it's going to slip. That's why I told you to hold on to the old O-ring, just in case. Now you want to take the smaller O-ring and slather it with oil. That smaller O-ring fits into an indentation that's around the bottom side of the oil filter housing. Replace the plug, and you can go ahead and hand tighten it. Now you'll insert the ratchet and give it a final tighten. Just snug, you don't have to go too tight here. The replacement paper filter can now be inserted, and it doesn't matter which end faces out, I just like to use the side that has the words on it. Now, I was always taught to pre-fill your oil filter before you install it. Sometimes people don't agree with me, but this is what I was taught. When replacing the oil filter housing, I always thread it by hand for the first few turns, just to make sure that I'm not cross-threading it because it's made out of plastic. Once it's as snug as possible, I go ahead and wipe it down to remove any excess oil to avoid any dripping. From there, you can secure it with your 64mm oil wrench. And according to the internet, you'll want to use 18 pounds of torque. The skid plate can now be replaced, and I want to admit that I had a little bit of a hard time with this at first, and here's why. It has 2 clips that are inserting into a cross member that are underneath the plastic part. There was one there, and there's another one here. The front of the skid plate will need to be inserted beneath the plastic part that you removed earlier. Once you get it hooked then, you'll need to hold it with one arm while you're placing the bolts to secure it in place. You'll want to start by loosely threading the 4 bolts on the plate, and then going back with your ratchet afterwards to tighten them all at once. The 2 10mm bolts can now be installed in the front along with the push clip that was in the middle. At this point, we're ready to refill the engine oil. I always start with the 5 quarts first, and then I check the dipstick to make sure I'm not overfilling it. It never happens with just 5 quarts, I'm just paranoid. Once I confirm, I go ahead and add the 6th quart. Now I do want to call out that Toyota dipsticks can be tricky to read. After 6 quarts, I just add a little bit at a time. Your goal is to fill up to the 2nd dot. Now I'm not going to lie though, I had to check my oil level the following day once the oil settled just to verify that it was in the right spot. Once you're satisfied with the oil level, remove the funnel and replace the oil fill cap. Now for some reason, Toyota disabled the ability to reset the oil meter from just general settings. We have now gone back to the way it used to be. You'll need to place the odometer into trip A, then you'll need to power off the vehicle. While the car is off, press and hold the odometer button, and without stepping on the brake, go ahead and press the start button 2 times. Continue holding the odometer button while the reset status bar completes. Your meter is now reset. Congratulations, your oil change is now complete. If you found this video to be beneficial, give us a like or drop a comment below. Thanks for watching.